The Joe Rogan Experience.
What do you say to someone who is happy with what they do, lives a fulfilled life, exercises, and is still depressed?
Yes, I thought a lot about this. Remind me to come back to the thing about East London.
I know this is an issue with a lot of people. I know people that worship at the altar of science and modern medicine that firmly believe that all depression is because of some sort of chemical imbalance in the brain, and anything that debates that or anything that disputes that notion it pisses them off.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I would have been like that for many.
Do you get that?
Yeah, of course, I was like that for many years.
Do you get that?
Oh, do you mean do I get some people responding that way? Sure, of course. I think the World Health Organization is the leading medical body in the world, right? They did a study of all the best evidence, and they explained very clearly that mental health is a social indicator, right? It has social causes. It needs social solutions as well as individual solutions. The science on this is overwhelming. You won't get many scientists who say, in fact, you struggle to find any scientists who say depression is purely a biological phenomenon, right? Pretty much everyone agrees there's some social and psychological component. I think there's a weird disconnect between what the scientists know and what the public is told, right? I don't know anyone who went to their doctor who, apart from this wonderful doctor in East London who we can talk about, who went with depression and anxiety and was told anything other than a biological story. I mean, they may be asked, some of them were asked about childhood, what was your childhood like, and referred to a therapist, but no one was told about these wider social causes. No one was told, like, do you feel controlled at work? Well, okay, it's a fact that could be making you depressed. But in terms of the people who are depressed but don't, because this was a real mystery to me, right? I knew people, I thought, but this guy's got everything and he's still depressed. What's going on here? And I think there's two things to say about that. One is, I started to, for various reasons, for research, for something else, I was reading some like feminist texts from the early 60s, right? And a really common thing that happened in the early 60s is women would go to their doctor and they'd say, doctor, there's something really wrong with my nerves. People talked about in terms of nerves then, we don't do that anymore. Something really wrong with my nerves because I've got everything a woman could possibly want. I've got a husband who doesn't beat me, I've got a car, I've got a washing machine, I've got 2 kids, but I feel like shit, right? And the doctor would go, you're right, and give a Valium. Now, if we could travel back in time and speak to those women, what we'd say is, right, you've got everything you could possibly want by the standards of the culture, but the standards of the culture are just wrong, right? As a woman, as a human being, you need more than just a washing machine and a car, right? You need a fulfilling life, you need to have meaning and purpose. And a very similar thing I think is happening today. So for example, when I speak to people who say, I've got everything I could want, but I feel like shit. So tell me about your life. Very often they're working really hard in prestigious jobs that they don't like, they don't enjoy hour by hour, to buy things that don't give them pleasure. It comes back to this hijacking by junk values that we're talking about that Professor Tim Kasser discovered. So what you've got is, because we've been told a totally misleading story about what makes us satisfied and happy as human beings, I think this comes up again and again in the interviews you do, because we've been taught in different ways, because we've been told a misleading story about that, we live our lives according to the wrong script. We feel like shit, and rather than question the script, we think there must be something wrong with us biologically. Now, there are biological contributions, it's important to say that, but one of the things that really blew my mind on this was, I interviewed this woman, amazing social scientist called Dr. Brett Ford in Berkeley. She did this research. It's kind of simple research. It just asked, if you consciously decided you were going to spend more hours a day trying to make yourself happier, would you actually become happier, right? And they did this research, she didn't do it alone, obviously, with her colleagues, in the United States, Japan, Russia, and Taiwan. And what they found was, in the US, if you try to make yourself happier consciously, you do not become happier. In the other countries, if you try to make yourself happier, you do become happier. And they were like, what's going on? So they did more research, and what they discovered was, in the US, and obviously I spend a lot of my time here, but in Britain as well, if you try to make yourself happier, you try to do something generally for yourself. You buy something for yourself, you big yourself up, you try to get a promotion. In the other countries, generally, if you try to make yourself happier, you do something for someone else, right? You try to help your friends, your family, your community.
Wait a minute. What countries
So it's Japan,
this?
Russia, and China. It's most of the rest of the world.
They stress this? That this is a part of their culture? That if you want to be happy, you do something for someone else?
it's so implicit in the culture that they live collectively that it's not even, just like we wouldn't even, if you said, do you think happiness is an individualistic thing, we'd be like, what are you even talking about?
Isn't that sort of an extrinsic idea as well? The idea that you're going to be happy by trying to make other people happy?
Well, this is the thing. So intrinsic values are not about just internal to yourself. Right. They're things that you value. So your intrinsic value could be spending time with your kids, right? That was probably most people's strongest intrinsic value if they're parents, is being with their kids, bonding with their kids, loving their kids.
But my point is, if your goal is to get happy, and the way you've chosen to get happy is, I'm going to get happy by making other people happy, that seems very strange.
I don't think so. I think that's that. If you think about where humans evolved,
but shouldn't you just make other people happy because you love them?
But that is a way. Loving people and being present with them is a way of,
but not as like a specific. With a specific goal of making yourself happy. That seems.
But that's not why they do it. It's not like when they were told make yourself happy, they had an implicit script in their culture, which was like, oh right, if I want to make myself happy, I'll spend time with other people, I'll do things with other people. But if you think about it in terms of human evolution, it makes total sense, right? Think about our ancestors, where they evolved. If you were a group, if our ancestors had been individualists who were out to big up themselves as individuals, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
Right.
So it makes sense that we evolved as a species with instincts that are
there's no argument there. The question is the motivation of trying to get happy by helping other people. That just seems...
so it's so implicit in the culture for most people in, say, China, that they wouldn't even articulate it that way. It's only if you force them to say, look, try to make yourself happier, that the script becomes obvious. It's implicit. But this script that we have, this idea that the way you make yourself happier is as an individual, just doing something for yourself, and how you look to other people.
Let's stop there, because there is not one script in this country of how to make yourself happy. I think that's sort of disingenuous. This idea that the only way to make yourself happy is to do that. That's not what people are trying to do. What people are trying to do is be successful. And I don't think they necessarily equate success with happiness, but what they do equate success with is an alleviation of debt, an alleviation of problems, an alleviation of a lot of the issues that people face.
Totally.
And they think of that as, if you look at the problems that you have when you're growing up, you look at especially if you grow up in a poor family, one of the main problems that you face is you're worried about paying your bills. So you say, someday I'm going to get to a point where that is no longer an issue. I'm going to make it. I'm going to be successful. They're not doing it thinking this is going to make me happy. I very rarely see that, and which is one of the reasons why even people's parents, and this freaks me the fuck out, will tell them to not pursue their dreams, but instead to pursue something that's more likely to happen. Like, don't pursue your dream of becoming an actor or a singer or whatever it is. Instead, pursue your think of being the foreman at the company you work at, because that's attainable.
I think you're totally right, and I think there's a lot of evidence that you're right, that the financial anxiety is a massive driver of depression and anxiety, obviously. That there's an interesting study that found people who have an income from property are 10 times less likely to develop an anxiety disorder than people who don't. And there was a really interesting experiment in how we can respond to that. It's one that President Obama said late in his term he thinks would have to happen across the country in the next 20 years for various reasons. So in Canada in the 70s, the Canadian government chose a town at random. It seems to genuinely have been random. It's a town called Dauphin. It's anyone who knows Canada, it's about 4 hours out of Winnipeg. And they said to a big group of people in this town, we're going to give you guys, for the foreseeable future, we're going to give all of you a guaranteed basic income. We're going to give you the equivalent of, in today's money, $15,000 US, right? There's nothing you can do that means we'll take it away from you, and there's nothing you have to do in return for it. You're citizens of our country, we want you to have a good life, right? It was partly because they had a kind of welfare system, but it was, a lot of people were falling through the cracks, and they wanted to do a little experiment to see would this work better. And this was studied very carefully by a woman I interviewed called Dr. Evelyn Forget to see what happened. And loads of interesting things happened. People spent more time with their kids. Very few people quit work, but a lot of people turned down shitty jobs, so actual overall work standards improved because employers had to attract people with better standards. But for me, the most interesting thing is there was a huge fall in depression and anxiety, right? Depression and anxiety that was so severe people had to be hospitalized fell by 9%. Which is remarkable in just 3 years. And then the program ended. Dr. Forget said to me, I thought so much about that what I'd learned about the cow. Dr. Forget said, that's an antidepressant, right? we should expand our idea of an antidepressant to be anything that reduces depression. Right. That should include pills, but also, so you're totally right. I mean, look, I grew up, my dad's a bus driver, my mum worked in a shelter, my grandmother cleaned toilets. Financial anxiety is a massive driver of the despair. I mean, more than half of all Americans have not, because of the incredible financial pressure they've been put under, got $500 set aside for if a crisis comes along, right? So you're talking about, that's a huge and again, that's really important, because explain to people, if that's making you depressed and anxious, don't let a doctor tell you you've just got a chemical imbalance in your brain, right? That's...
But do doctors still say that?
All the time. My nephew's best friend just literally a couple of weeks ago went to the doctor and was told, yeah, you've got a dopamine imbalance. The doctor said it's migrated in the 20 years since I went there from a serotonin.
Was this in England or in the United States?
This was in England, but I mean, I get contacted constantly by people who are being told they're told they've got chemical imbalances in their brains.
Are they just as likely to prescribe antidepressants in England as they are American?
It's slightly lower, but it's still exceptionly high.
It's still, yeah. There's that narrative that an antidepressant must be in some sort of a pill form, and that even the expression antidepressant and antidepressant, it's a very confusing thing that we've sort of adopted very quickly in this country, and it's relatively recent, over the last 60, 70 years. And the people that have antidepressants in their body, that take them all the time and swear by them, boy, if you try to tell them in any way that there's a better option, they get extremely defensive. I have a friend, she's very smart, and she's one of the people that will, very aggressively debate this idea that it's anything but a chemical imbalance, but she doesn't take care of her body. She doesn't exercise all the time, she's slightly overweight. She doesn't eat the best foods. It's a weird thing.
Well, and she's living in a society and culture that has all these forces that are rising that make people feel terrible, right?
Yeah.
And so a big thing for me is when I'm talking to this, because I've had some of that reaction as well, not too much, but I've had some of that reaction as well. First thing for me I always say is, I want to expand the menu of options. I don't want to take anything off the table, right? It's not about...
You say that, and I think you're probably being pretty honest, but you really do want to. You want to eliminate... but just by the standard of improvement, you do probably want to take most people off of antidepressants, don't you? Wouldn't you rather they have a better choice?
Yeah, I would draw an analogy. Obesity has massively risen in the Western world. It hasn't risen because people suddenly became greedy and lazy. It's risen because our food system is terrible, the way food supply system is terrible, and we've built cities that people can't walk and bicycle around, right? And they're really stressed all the time, and they get home from work exhausted, so they don't have time to exercise, a lot of them. In that context, some people will do, stomach stapling, liposuction, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. Now, I'm not against that. But if we change the society in the way that I would want to with obesity, so that people could walk and cycle and, they had access to healthy food, far fewer people would need stomach stapling or liposuction, right? So I would draw, it's not a perfect analogy, but I'd say is, if the social changes that I want to happen, if we follow the places that have succeeded in reducing depression and anxiety, over time you would see fewer people feeling they needed chemical antidepressants.